Hello. Welcome to Frida Maletsky Healing Arts. I'm your host, Frida, and I am the healing artist. Friends, I am so excited to share my big sister, Sophie, with you today.
I have, I have my big mug of coffee and I'm ready to go,
The two of us actually just got out of doing a healing this morning because Sophie is in my program, Return to Self-Love.
which is awesome.
Thank you. And we just finished that up, and she is being so kind to offer us her time and hop on and have a podcast episode.
Yeah.
So, Sophie is one of my biggest cheerleaders.
Hmm.
She always has been. We have an interesting sort of like history together because she is 15 years older than me
Yeah.
and same parents. I was a
Yep.
surprise.
Oh, yeah. As it was, well, I was too. We were both surprised, surprise. So it's surprise,
Surprise!
surprise.
But by the time I was cognitive, Sophie had one foot out the door and she was really like leaving to go off to college.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So she would come back to visit
Hmm.
in the summers,
Hmm.
and she always lived somewhere interesting. Like she went to Philadelphia and then to New York City
Hmm.
and then to
California.
San
San
Francisco,
Francisco.
California.
Hmm.
And she would always take me, even when I was very, very little, for a weekend or a week to
Yeah.
treat me to these different places. So we did have connection, but we didn't grow up together. And it's really interesting because we both had very different childhoods with the same parents.
Yeah. Yeah. Very different childhoods. But also, I mean, by the time that you were born, our father was like ready to have a child. When I was born, it was, I mean, they were very, very young. Our parents were 20 and 21 when they had me. And, they were married and struggling, and it wasn't an easy time for them. There were a lot of family constraints, there was a lot of pressure, and, just, I mean, when you're that young and you've got a little baby, and should put out there that when I was born, so our mother is rather small. She's a tiny person. She's only about 5 foot, maybe what, 5'1", 5'2" for
Well, she's shrinking now, but like,
Oh, well, yeah, well, we all are. But
yeah,
she's
she's little.
little. And when I was born, I was actually pretty big. I think I was like 20, I think I might have been 8 pounds, and I think I was like 23 inches long or something like that. I was a
A
pretty big
long
baby.
baby.
I was long. And my feet were actually curled up to my shins. And so when I came out, it's kind of a funny story, but when I came out, they pulled me out with forceps, which, in the 60s when I was born is how they did it. So I came out with this cone head. I was covered in birthmarks. My nose was smashed over to the side. Um, and my feet were curled up, touching my shin bones. And poor mom, I mean, I think my ears stuck out. I mean, I was not a very pretty baby. I think I was kind of one of those things where you went, "Oh God, can we return her? You know, can we do plastic surgery now?" Um, but anyway, as it was, they placed me on mom's chest, and she said to the doctor, "Will her nose straighten out?" And the doctor, no lie, said, "Well, nobody's perfect."
Yeah, it was kind of a traumatic birth story.
So my poor mom, so poor mom, she's looking at me and she's like, "Well, if she can't be beautiful, let her be wise," which is why they named me Sophia, which means wisdom, right?
Yes.
But anyway, so I had these funky little feet that needed to be, they weren't club feet, but they were touching the shins. So they had to be massaged daily. And I think it was like 6 times a day. They needed to be massaged for like 15 minutes. And then I wore these like really, really funky shoes that had like a solid piece down the front and flattened out the foot. So, and I started walking when I was like 9 months old, and it was like I would be like so it couldn't have been easy, being 20 and 21 and then having this child.
Right.
There was a lot of tension when I was growing.
The
What
juxtaposition
were you
of
gonna
our
say?
birth story is like they were ready to have me because they were in their mid 30s at that point. They're ready
Mhm.
to have me.
Right.
Um, There was some more financial stability. There was a house. There was
Mhm.
like room in mom's womb, so much so that I stayed an extra month. I was supposed to be a Halloween baby, and I was a Thanksgiving baby that was born
Oh yeah. Yeah, I
a
mean you
fit of laughter because mom ended up like having some people over. So our parents were um, leaders in the youth
so
community.
I can
Yeah.
tell this part.
Yeah.
They were the youth leaders at our church.
Yes.
And these two great guys, maybe one might have been three, but they came over and they were hysterical. And they were over there and they were making mom and dad, they were all sitting around the coffee table and they were just laughing and laughing and laughing. And then literally they left and mom went into labor.
So
You know,
born from laughter.
yeah, no, you're born from laughter. You came out like fully formed. You had a big full head of hair. You had like little hips, a little waist. I mean, like you came out like a runway model, whereas I came out looking like Quasimodo, and you came out like, this beautiful runway model of a baby, and just totally
Not
different.
only that, but then came out and immediately pooped all over the doctor.
Yeah, but I think a lot of babies do that. But
No, but
yes,
I like that. I like
it
that.
it is true. You
I'm like,
poop.
don't miss that aspect of this story.
Yeah, you pooed all over the doctor. It's true. And you know what's interesting is I realized I was away on a retreat, on a young life retreat when you were born. I was not at home when you were born.
That's interesting.
I
And
just
I know it, and that's probably for the best. And also it was like mom said the experience when she had you was it was like rush, rush, rush at the hospital and they weren't very nice.
yeah.
And then they were trying a new program at the hospital when I was born where they had like a section for dad to sit. They gave them like a beautiful meal that they could share together. Like they were trying this new kind of program for mothers having a baby. She was able to stay in the hospital longer. So it was just like a very distinctly different childhood experience. Like I
Yeah.
never had to, because of the financial stability, I never had to want for a thing in my life compared to like, I feel like you grew up with a little bit more, had to get real creative about making things work.
Yes, and so I always like to put the and in there because the thing about it was that we lived in Philadelphia, right? And there were so many free programs. And, mom was involved in the church. So I never felt like I wanted for anything, even though, I mean, there are stories of us at Christmas time, no Christmas tree because we couldn't afford one and Grammy and Pop coming to visit. This is mom's mom and dad coming to visit. And I remember very specifically, it was slightly snowing, and Pop came up the stairs to our little apartment because there were stairs out front. And I remember, now this is my memory of it. I remember them being like brick stairs, and that he came up the brick stairs and left footprints. I specifically remember footprints in this dusted snow, and in one hand he had this little like 2 foot Charlie Brown Christmas tree. And I mean, this is a specific memory. Now, I don't know if this is something that's been created in my mind, but I remember that specifically. And then I also remember another Christmas where we had no Christmas tree, and mom was very sad, and dad and I went out, and it was Christmas Eve, and we went out and we were walking the street, and there was a guy who had like one Christmas tree left, and he just wanted to get home. And he was done, and it was not it wasn't this big full, it was just a funky little Christmas tree. And dad bought it from him for, I think it was like half price. And so we did have a Christmas tree. And I remember that coming home. And I remember specifically mom making gingerbread cookies that we put on for decorations.
Aw.
Now, and I remember my dad, I remember our dad making these really gorgeous clothespin. They were the old clothespins that had like the feet, and he put corks on the top of them and he painted them beautifully and made them into tin soldiers.
Nice.
And and they put those on the trees. So I mean, I don't ever remember feeling like I was poor because dad worked at the zoo, and so we could go to the zoo anytime we wanted. We had open access to the zoo. We went to the museum all the time because there were times when the museum was open for free. So growing up as a little child in the 60s in Philadelphia, everybody was poor.
Right.
So nobody felt poor. Do you know what I mean?
Right. It had that real like original Sesame Street vibe.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, everybody shared. I mean, I remember that I did have a friend whose dad was a plastic surgeon, and they had a television. And I remember we would go over and all of us would watch the television, and they lived like two streets over, right? Amy and Sarah. And then when like I told you, I was pretty precocious, and mom had friends that worked in childhood studies, and they were always putting me in these programs to get studied, and I'd be doing these tests, and I'd get little chocolates, and I'd get, I never felt, and it was fun, it was all these games that I
Hmm.
was playing. So I never felt like there was anything missing from my childhood, to tell you the truth.
Right.
I didn't even know things were different back then. Yes, if you didn't have the right sneakers, there were Bobos. I mean, I
Yes,
remember,
I remember that
yeah,
word.
I mean, there were Bobos. You'd have, there was even a song. It was like Bobos. They make your feet feel fine. Bobos. They cost $1.99. I mean, that's the kind of thing. So yeah, if you didn't have the right sneakers, whatever. But it wasn't until I think I got into junior high or high school that I really realized that there was a differentiation. You know,
Right. Right. Yeah, I hear that.
I think really until I came out to Westchester, which our parents moved us from Philadelphia to Westchester because dad got a job. And so they moved out, and that's when we got the bigger house.
Hmm.
Was part of the family's house, and that was kind of mom's inheritance was to get this. And this was a huge house. I
Yep.
mean, it was 3 stories with a basement. So I mean, this is a huge, ginormous house with land, and I mean, it was beautiful. But it was in the middle of this little town that was very, very staid, and you didn't step out of line. And I mean, there
And
were,
that's where I grew up.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah,
So it was different. It
it
was very,
was. Yeah. I mean, and I didn't really have friends because I was a pretty weird kid. So, I mean, I had some friendly relationships, but I didn't have a lot of friends. I was definitely grew up really lonely. It was not until I got to high school that I actually started to really feel connected in any kind of way. I
well,
was
and that's when you
very
went back to
alone.
Philadelphia. That's when you were back. So,
I went back to Philadelphia. Yeah. We moved
so
back to Philadelphia and I got friends. Yeah. I
right,
did not fit in Westchester.
right. So I
It was
had an
challenging.
opportunity to be in Philadelphia, become who I was, and then, kind of kind of knew who I was, kind of a thing. And then I came to Westchester. I had tons of friends, but I've always been very outgoing. You know what I mean? I've always usually made friends pretty easily. So I had a ton of friends. I wouldn't say I was exceptionally. It's interesting. Only now that I've been doing my healing work and stuff like that do I realize how much I may have glossed over my childhood, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like,
Say more about that. I don't.
well, rewrote parts of my childhood. Like I didn't have many, as I grew into an adulthood, I didn't have many real memories of childhood.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
I just assumed I had this happy childhood. In Philadelphia, I have a lot of memories. I do have a lot of memories of Philadelphia where I had an amazing teacher. I grew up in the programming in Philadelphia where it was called the open classroom. So they had first to third graders all together in one classroom. I
I
had this,
didn't know that.
yeah, and I had this gorgeous teacher. Her name was Mrs. Davis, and that allowed us to uh, basically educate ourselves so we could move through systems as quickly as we needed or wanted to. So I was a really good reader, and I was also really good at math. And so I was able to advance very quickly through all of the different programs because they were basically pods. They were basically modular programs. And I remember we had these with these earphone things, and it was these stories that you would be reading these stories basically like, they have now with like Leapfrog, where you're reading the stories and the words would light up. You
Okay.
you'd be reading the story in like a little magazine with headphones on. And so then once you finished it, you would do all these answers. You would have all these answers that you would go through. And if you hit the mark on the percentage of answers you got correctly for your cognitive, your abilities to retain the information, you can move on to the next one. So, I had a teacher who allowed me to just go bonk, 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 which was
It's
great for
really
me.
interesting. Yeah.
And then, you get to Westchester where you had to follow the specific
Yeah,
pattern.
one of my core wounding memories that I've spent time dealing with and doing reparenting therapy around was like a core wound for me was going to kindergarten. So mom kept me out of school for a year. So I was a year older than kids because she took me to museums. I spent my childhood going to museums all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
And theater. You went to
and
theater all
theater.
the time.
Yeah. And like, so I was a year older than the kids, and I remember going into kindergarten and we were learning to do a rainbow, and like somehow I missed the mark at understanding that a rainbow was Roy G. Biv. Like I didn't understand that was, but I was the only one in the class that didn't understand that we were going for that Roy G. Biv style situation. And I colored my rainbow, funky, like it was all the colors in any order that I wanted. And I remember how wrong I felt when everybody had these rainbows and I had definitely done it wrong. And it was like a core imprint shame. I am wrong and bad. And like it only got worse from there. Like I was a little child, and from a very young child on, I was disassociating away from my body. I would just leave my body at school and have very core memories of being in first grade, and I didn't want to be here. I wanted to die. So it wasn't until I was, and have been through, so I've always been a spiritual seeker,
Hmm.
because I spent so much time, I was just in abject pain, I would say, my entire life until I was in like my late 30s.
Yeah.
I was like 38 years old. Like it was always like, how do I get myself to a place to be okay?
Right.
And how funny is it that that our parents named me Frida, which means peaceful.
Right.
And I couldn't find peace in my heart. It was my number one desire in life was to find peace in my heart, which I finally did find.
Right.
But I was in my 40s.
Right. Well, so I mean, your life has been a journey to find the fulfillment of your name, basically.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
then at this point, to want to share that with others, it's like, oh my God, if I can spend the majority of my life wanting to die,
right,
and then the arch of that story is being so happy to be here. I get out of bed in the morning and I dance around and I'm happy to be here. This extreme joy for
right.
being alive. I want to share that
Yeah,
story
yeah.
with other people. I want to help others get there because I know how hard that feels.
Right. Well, and also, I mean, what's really interesting for me as your sister is, being able to like listen to your podcast or, spend time in class with you or whatever it is, and learning these things that I never knew about. Like, because I was so wrapped up in my own survival mode, you
Right.
know, and because I was in my, and, we don't have to go there, but, both of us were
Extremely traumatized. We both
ex
had extremely traumatizing childhoods, but
right.
in different ways.
Right. And we don't need to go there, but both of us have suffered through sexual abuse. Both of us have been, raped. Both of us have had very, again, we don't need to go that into that here, but because I was in survival mode, my survival mode was just to put on the blinders and work as hard as you could, you know.
Right. Like your active disassociation was more succeed. So like type A personality success, be so incredibly busy that there's no like workaholic,
Right. Oh,
so that
oh,
there's no space to
for
think.
anything. Right. No, there's no space. And also cobble that with, codependency issues, right?
Mhm.
So completely codependently enmeshed with my husband of the time. And, working, having a workaholic lifestyle, being codependently enmeshed, thinking that I had to, solve everybody's problems, but not really listening to their problems, just assuming I knew what their problems were, and then solving it with either financial means or, offering, this little tidbit or that little tidbit or whatever it was, usually monetary or gifts. I was always known for giving gifts to everybody or paying them more than the time that they worked, all that kind of stuff. And that was me thinking I was taking care of people the way they needed to be taken care of, instead of, just maybe saying, hey, what do you need from me? What is it that you need to make things work, you know, better and easier? And we should explain that, you worked for me for 15 years in
Mhm.
my business and you did amazing work. But what you needed from me as your boss and from your sister were two different things. And it was so enmeshed. The
Right. And I'm also codependent.
Right. So it was so enmeshed, the work and the family, and the fact that we grew up entirely differently, but we were
Mhm.
sisters, so there was a lot to work through. And there was
Mhm.
those 15 years where basically we just plowed through. We put
Yeah.
blinders on and we just plowed through. And
Yeah.
we were doing 300 events a year. And these were gorgeous events. We're not talking about, a balloon twisting clown that came.
No, really high end.
Hey, kids.
Yeah, like completely personalized. Right. So I think we skipped through some stuff here because I know that our conversation to ourselves makes sense. But like growing, so I would just sort of like circle back and say we grew up separately.
Huh?
Um, and but we both grew up traumatized,
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, so my trauma took on, so you went external, you went outside and seeking external validation, and my whole thing was I went inside. Mine was, oh God, I have a trunk in the garage that has like, I don't know how many journals. Like I just went dark and within. Like I went within to,
Right.
so,
But do you remember, so there was a period of time where I was living, I think this is when I'd moved out to the West Coast. I'd moved out to San Francisco, and you and I had a journal that we sent back and forth to
oh
each other.
yeah, and we would share. Yes, I do.
Yeah. And
And
there
I
was,
was like 11,
yeah,
10, 11 years old.
it's what, yeah, 10, 11, 12. And you might have been older because I remember that there's one about you sitting in coffee shops. So
Okay, well, it went on for quite some time.
it might have been 14 or so by the time.
But it went on, and we used to send tapes back and forth to each other,
Oh yeah.
like little tapes. But like, it started when I was young because I remember I would sit on the steps and write to you
Mm,
in Westchester. And
mhm.
like, I moved into Philadelphia when I was 13.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah. So I remember specifically you telling me that you were going to burn your journals. Do you remember that?
no.
So you told me I'm going to burn my journals, and I said to you, don't. I said, put them in a box, lock them away, because someday in the future, those are going to be really important for you.
And I
Yeah.
did. I put them in a box and I locked them away. They are literally in a giant steamer trunk in my garage that I've carried from Westchester to Philadelphia to South San Francisco to Pacifica to Oakland to
Mhm.
Richmond.
Yeah. Yeah.
That thing weighs 8,000 pounds.
Yeah. It's probably waterlogged and mouse eaten and all that kind of stuff too. But
It's neither of those things, but it has made a lot of journey. It's made quite the journey. No, it's none of that stuff. Where do you think I live? What is going
how I am
I'm
I not
44. I'm not 444. What is up? Mouse eaten and waterlogged. What do you think I'm doing?
good
What is
story.
this life that I live that is like a pretty middle class lady?
Because it's my story. Because remember, well, so
Stop.
to fill it in is that when I had moved to New York, I'd moved to Philadelphia, went to school, got my degree at the Philadelphia College of Performing Arts, and I got my degree in acting. I moved to New York. I start working as an actress. And so I had a trunk filled with all my playbills and all of that sort of stuff. And when we moved, when we moved, had finally brought those over with us to California. I had a little storage unit, and the storage unit flooded, right? And I didn't realize that it flooded because I didn't go to the storage unit for some time. And by the time I got there, they were all like, you know how water will log, it
Mhm.
waterlogs stuff, and like all the pages were stuck together, and you know,
Okay.
and rats had gotten in and made nests and stuff like that. So
Okay.
so I guess that was my story in
Very
90.
fair.
So now I have this image of you with this trunk and
Yeah,
all the
no,
toilet,
not at
and all the
all.
books are like, turned into those
No,
flowers
no.
that they have. Yeah. No.
No, it's like one of those giant steamer trunks that has done things like held a TV on top of it while in the middle of the living room. No, it's in the garage at this house, but no, no, no. It's been completely fine.
That's so funny. But the other thing too is that people should understand is that nobody finds us as funny as we find each other.
That is true. That's true. Okay. Anyway, so same parents, very different
Childhood.
growing up, both incredibly traumatized. And then around 6 years ago, both of us came into doing healing work. So
Right.
I've always been a spiritual seeker,
Yes.
and always been connected in certain ways, but I call it falling asleep. So when I came out to the after college, I moved from Philadelphia to the Bay Area and started working with Sophie. And basically, I fell asleep for 15 years.
Mhm.
And I had a series of events start to shake the crap out of me and wake me up,
Mhm. Mhm.
culminating in one specific event in 2019 that it was like, oh, okay, there was then and there's now. So then it was like, let me really, and then when COVID hit and
Mhm.
everything closed down, I had the ability to finally really go within and start doing some super deep healing work. And it was also just divine timing that that was when that was just gonna come online.
Mhm. Yeah, and it was
Something
probably
similar for you.
actually COVID probably was the best thing for both of us. I know that sounds
No,
crazy.
it's
People are
true.
like, oh my God. But it made me reevaluate my life. Well, what happened on my side is that, and it's, what's really crazy is I'm realizing, it was like May 4th. It was 2 days before my birthday, which
Hmm.
May 6th. It was 2 days before my birthday that my 54th birthday, that I discovered that my marriage of what would almost be 30 years at that point in time, um, was falling apart. And that for the previous 4 years, from the age of 50 to 54, that I'd been kind of living, as you said, asleep. I was, sleepwalking through life. And while I was doing that, you know, um, my marriage fell apart under my feet without me knowing it.
Yeah.
On basically the eve of my 54th birthday, I discovered that my marriage was over. And that shook me to the core. I mean, I remember sitting in the kitchen. I had my back against the wall. I slid down the wall and I was just shaking. And I remember that being kind of a childhood image of me sitting with my back in the wall in the kitchen, kind of tucked into the corner, because our father would have these kind of rages. He would have these really angry rages. And my reaction was to pull into the corner and, just really, really just turn into a tiny, 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 tiny as I could, little ball of quaking material. And I remember that happening when I discovered what was going on. And I remember just shaking. I remember shaking, 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 shaking. And then, you know, um, as things progressed, I got into therapy for the first time in my life. I actually started to realize that I was codependently enmeshed,
Mhm.
realized that my husband of the time, I'll never forget, my therapist said to me, you know, Sophie, your ex-husband couldn't breathe. And I remember him telling me that, and that was like this gut punch to me, and at that point in time, what ended up happening is I took everything as was my way. It became about me being a bad person and oh my gosh, I created this situation. I ruined the marriage. It was all my fault. Da, 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 so it all became this internal meshigas within inside me. But as we started to unpack it, my therapist and I, that's not what he was saying. What he was trying to explain to me is that because of my codependency, I didn't allow him to ask for his needs because I was always constantly trying to guess what his needs were and preemptively take
Meet and
care.
exceed.
Yeah. And with me being an overachiever, that over exceeding, that overbearing didn't leave him any room to breathe.
Or to grow
Or
because he
to-
didn't get to have his own mistakes and deal with them himself and learn, right? Which we're each, if Earth is a school and we're all here to learn do our healing work and do our work, just like learn and grow. When your needs are consistently met and you don't have the ability to figure stuff out on your own, you're not really able to take the curriculum.
Right. And so, I mean, that was very hard. It was a hard time for me. It was a hard 2 years, those first 2 years when I got into therapy, and really started to delve into the relationship that I'd had. But that's also when I uncovered all of this childhood abuse that I had actually just just glossed over, just like I had no memories of. And then
Right.
all of a sudden, all of these memories started to come back, and I realized there was incest, and I realized that there was, rape by two of my teachers. And I mean, all of these things that came into play that I didn't understand. So I shut them down and just became a workaholic because it was much easier to work and take care of other people's problems than it was to actually face the trauma that I had gone through,
Right.
to the point where I had recreated and rewritten and actually like totally created a fantasy around what these things were.
It's so interesting to me. Yeah, because I was never afraid to look at them.
Right.
Like I was
Well,
always just like, and I started my therapy and started my healing journey at 11
right.
when I disclosed my sexual abuse because I didn't know it had been sexual abuse until we started learning about sex at school.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, like I knew something was wrong, but I didn't really get it. Like I
Right.
didn't actually get anyway, and I was afraid.
Right.
Like I felt wrong and bad, like I did something bad.
Right. Oh yeah, me too. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then that ability to face something head on and just like look at it. And then also you had talked about how you would shrink into the corner when dad was in rage mode. And I had a different experience when dad was in rage mode because dad loved me so much, mom would take me and put me between her and dad's rage mode. And it was like, be funny, Frida. And then
You would diffuse it.
I would diffuse it. So I was differently codependent and meshed, right? You went off to college, mom was devastated. I had to make sure that I was everything for mom because you weren't there anymore. So
Mhm.
becoming incredibly at 3 years old, codependent with mom in that way. And
Right.
then also always being the funny diffuser, be the clown so that daddy isn't scary because dad's scary.
You can be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what's
It's just
interesting.
interesting. Same family, different ways. Like this almost like this just different ways of dealing.
Well, and the different ways here is for me, my thing is to cut and run. So basically, when I turned 18, I got a job and I worked 60, 80 hours a week so I could make enough money so that I could go to college, so that I could get into the dorms. I did everything within my power to make sure that I was out and very independent. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I did that from the get-go. And it
Yeah.
was like whenever things got too scary, I just cut and run.
Gotcha.
That was my modus operandi.
And I haven't experienced that from you because I don't,
Well, I don't do it anymore.
right.
Now I
But like,
face things head
yeah,
on.
right. But I didn't experience with you actually like working with you either.
No, because we had a big goal in mind.
Right.
We were both we were both working. We were
Yeah.
both, and it wasn't until COVID when things got like totally completely shut down, right? Remember they got just shut down and you went to Oakland and I was in South San Francisco and we kept things going. We limped along, but I mean that's when I tried to keep everybody employed as long as I could, and my marriage was falling apart, and I was just trying to stay on afloat, you know, and you were off doing your spiritual work, which was good. I mean, it was, and
And
then,
hard. And hard. I needed to detach in a way where it was like, I'm not going to talk to you. I didn't talk to you for like 2 months.
yep,
And I didn't talk to mom and dad for a month.
yep,
I was like, I don't know what I feel like.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I had to remember what I even feel like without other influence in my life.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
it's really interesting.
So COVID actually ended up being the best thing. And then I think you introduced me. So what started my spiritual work? I mean, my therapy, my therapist at the time was a practitioner of something called Hakomi. And Hakomi has a spiritual aspect, excuse me, to it. And so, there was spirituality, but it was really talk therapy. But there was an element of spirituality to it. And I think it was you turned me on to All the Answers, which is Cassidy's podcast.
Mhm.
And so I started listening to All the Answers and I got intrigued by Katie Rubin and I started taking Katie's classes. And that's when my spiritual journey started.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you were the one who kickstarted that. And then as I started to spiritually heal, you and I began to come to a much healthier relationship. I
Right.
think.
Because the way I put it, like I've always loved you, right? And idolized my big sister. But there was a period of time where I didn't like you very much.
Sure.
And
Uh,
then now you're like one of my best friends in the entire world.
well, we had to get through a whole lot of stuff. And one
We
of the
had a lot to heal.
Yeah, we did have a lot to heal, and we still have a lot to heal. But I mean, as everybody does, and I mean, I think basically, as I am now on the eve of turning 60, um, it's one of these things where I realize, I remember in therapy being like, when the heck do I get through this?
Right.
And my therapist would call it being in the jungle, right? You're in the jungle, Sophie. And I would like, well, when do I get to the other side? And I remember very specifically, and this is when I finally was at a point where I told my therapist, I think I'm done,
Mm.
at least for right now. Um, was when I realized I didn't need to get out of the jungle
Right.
because I actually was in love with the jungle, and that the work that I was doing, the spiritual work in conjunction with my therapy, in conjunction with just daily life, I was finding that I was fascinated by the jungle.
Hmm.
And that the journey, even though sometimes you hit a thicket where you got to get out the machete and chop a path because you can't get through, or you have to climb up a tree and get to the very top so that you can see where you are, you know, that's still, even though those are hard moments in time, that you're still in this gorgeous, lush jungle that has giant insects and monkeys and toucans and whatever else, right? And the loamy earth, and you're surrounded by exciting possibilities. Every day is an exciting possibility. Not necessarily an easy possibility, but an exciting possibility. And so when I came to say to myself, it doesn't matter how long I'm in the jungle because basically when I do get out of the jungle, that's the day that I die.
I know, right? I know, same.
Yeah. And so it's like, well, so no, I don't want to get out of the jungle. I want to stay in the jungle as long as I can. I want to be 100 in the jungle as long as I can still be chopping down the trees, you know?
Right.
What I don't want to do is be sitting on a rock going,
Well, everybody does their work in some way. Everybody moves through their things in some way, but some of us are like extra attracted to doing this work in a way where it is like we will get in there and we will excavate the trauma root and branch
yeah, I
as
always
much
love
as
when you
humanly
say,
possible,
I love when you say root and branch.
as
Every
much as we can get at it, as
Because
much
every
as we
time I
can.
think of it, I'm like, it's like every time something rears its, I was like, I thought I got that. I thought I had that coming. And then it's like, nope.
It's just another layer. It's like this onion spinning in space. And it's like, okay, cool. So, yes, we're done with that for now. And then it comes back in a year or 2 years. And it's like, but each time we are a different person in that moment. How will we respond to it? How will we handle it differently? Um,
Well, I always
yeah.
talk about it being, you remember that game? We used to play that game and then we stopped doing it because it was just so frustrating for children. But I think you remember making the balls with me, where we would take candy and you would wrap it in saran wrap. And then so you start with like a really good candy, like a Snickers bar. Well, you can't do peanuts anymore with kids, like a Mars bar or something like that. And then you would wrap it with this plastic wrap. And then you would add another candy, wrap it in plastic wrap. And so the idea is by the time you're done, you've got like this soccer-sized ball that has all these candies wrapped in it. And you basically play, like hot potato. And whenever the music stops, the kids get to unwrap it. But the friggin' thing about saran wrap is if you let saran wrap sit for any amount of time, it it clings and you can't get it open. And it would take 15 minutes for a kid to get the thing to a piece of candy. And by that time, the kids are like, I'm so bored. I hate this game. So, but that's what I know. We remember we stopped doing that. We were like, we're never going to play this game
Yeah.
again.
It's in
Um,
theory, it's like a good summer camp game.
it's
Meanwhile,
a
it's hot
great
outside, and then
game.
it's like,
Period.
yeah.
Well, then we started doing it. Then we started doing it with crepe paper, and that worked better because
Crepe
they
paper works because it'll unleash itself. It
right, right, right. But that's saran wrap. And so that's how I look at it is like, yeah, it's layers of an onion, but it's also maybe it's because I'm sugar oriented. It's like the whole notion of there being prizes, like and those prizes are like discoveries and like the healing of trauma and so but really there's still more to go. And what I do like about the whole saran wrap idea is that you can see the shadow of something down there and it's like you're unwrapping it and unwrapping it and unwrapping it and there is a goal in sight, you know but the ball is large.
What is the goal for you?
Hmm.
Because mine was inner peace for a really long time. And then when I ex achieved inner peace, I live in a world of inner peace. The new goalpost or the new thing is that I'm working towards or feeling is probably root chakra healing in a way where I feel safe and secure. Like
Yeah.
feeling safety and security is probably the one that I'm going for now.
Sure. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. No, it's interesting because I think inner peace has always been something that I've been striving for as well.
Mm,
You know,
mhm.
I sometimes, I sometimes think about our journeys, you and I. You
Mhm.
know, I used to think of it as we were on the same street, like we were on, Cortlandt Avenue, and you just happened to be like a block ahead of me. You
Yeah.
know, and I sometimes still get that feeling, but I also get this feeling that I might be on Cortlandt Avenue and you're on Golf.
Yeah.
You're on another side of town, and we're still on the journeys, but we're on very different paths. And sometimes they could, sometimes they intersect. But it's like, we can talk on the telephone while we're walking down the street.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And we can still enjoy each other's journey. We can still be part of each other's journey. We can still, but we're not, you and I aren't walking side by side. It isn't like we're hand in hand. I think we have different journeys.
I would agree with that.
Well, I think it might come down to a bit of our like human design. And I know you've talked a little bit about human design, but I'm a manifester.
Hmm.
Uh,
Right. And I'm a projector, so I'm a guide.
right. And in my
Hmm.
chart, what I'm all about is community.
Hmm.
Right. So I'm here to create community. I'm here to bring people together, not necessarily to, I mean, in my chart, basically what supposed to do is bring people together and say, okay, so here's the main goal. Here's how we achieve it. Have at it.
Hmm.
That's what I'm supposed to do. And I learn by making mistake after mistake after mistake
Yeah,
after
we
mistake.
both have that one.
Right? The 3-5 profile.
You have 3-5, I have 1-3, but
Yeah, I've got 3-5. So I'm like,
it's the three in it.
yeah, it's the mistake, 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 mistake. And I can then bring that because I can be like, okay, look, I've
Don't
been
do this.
I've been through this. Don't try this because let me tell you, ain't gonna work. But hey, if you want to do it, that's totally fine. I'm just telling you my experience of it. But
But we
but
both are okay to fail. Neither of us have any issues failing. That is not, and you know what? That's unique. A lot of people are terrified of failure. The two of us are, I'm like, oh, honey, what doesn't work? Bring it on. You know how many times I've fallen flat on my face, and so have you. We just do over and over. My God, we just get up and go again.
well that
Nothing can stop
that
us.
that was the thing that built our business though. Do you
Yeah,
remember like
nothing can stop us. We are unstoppable.
because people would ask us to do stuff. They're like, well, okay, can we make a fish pond out of our cracked foundation fountain here and have the kids go fishing and at the birthday party and we'd be like sure and we'd
Yeah.
find out a way to get like 700 pounds of trout brought in so that these kids could go fishing. I mean, we would never say no and we'd figure it out.
Hmm.
We would always figure it out and we made lots of mistakes,
Hmm.
but we also learned a lot. And it built our business because we were the business that would figure stuff out. We'd never say no and it would always work.
Oh
Sometimes
yeah, it was always interesting. Like
just by the
genuinely
skin of
interesting.
our teeth.
Yeah. Yeah, and I can't stand doing the same thing over and over again. It's like, let me figure out the way to do it, understand it, and then it's like, what's next?
Yeah,
What,
exactly.
what's the next hill?
Yeah, exactly. But the thing about it too is that I think we also are, and I don't know if this is because of the way we were raised. So I'm not sure if this is how we were conditioned or if this is part of who we are as humans or what it is, but we've always taken responsibility for our actions.
Oh
So it's
yeah, absolutely.
like, you know, oh, I made a mistake. Let me acknowledge the fact that I made a mistake here. Let me apologize for my mistake if need be. Let me learn from my mistake and let me move on. You know what I mean? So it's not like what had happened to me in the beginning of my divorce was that I took all of the responsibility upon myself because that's when I was still enmeshed in codependency and still not healthy.
Well, and there's like a narcissistic wound there. Like Katie always used to say, I'm the biggest piece of, you know what, in the room, the biggest piece of poop.
Right.
Like is a kind of narcissistic wounding, which many people have because it's like comes in during childhood stuff. And I have had and healed too. Like it's
Sure.
I'm not saying you're a narcissist. I'm saying there's narcissistic wounding, and most people have some aspect of that.
Sure.
But that's what that is. And you had to heal away from that.
Well, sure. And it was the martyr syndrome. I also had the martyr syndrome.
Sure.
It's like, oh, I will take it upon myself so that you don't have to feel the pain, right? By saying, let me take this pain so that you can, move forward in your life. And talking specifically about my ex-husband, I didn't give him the opportunity to feel his pain, to feel his
Right.
emotion, to go through it. Because I didn't want, quote unquote, him to feel it, but really what that's about is me
Right.
feeling
Codependency is a lot about manipulating a situation so that
so
you
that I'd feel
feel
better.
safe.
Yeah, so that I feel better and I feel safe. So, taking that all on myself, taking all that shame and, the blame and all that sort of stuff, that didn't do any good for my ex-husband at all. You know,
Right, right. Yeah. And I mean, also the way that, a way that codependency shows up in my life is I have a similar situation with my husband. That's how, and like a large part of our marriage looked like exactly what you just said. How can I make sure that he's never unhappy or he's never expressing himself in a way that makes me feel scared?
right,
Like, how can I make it so that his needs are always met? But I don't do that anymore, right? Because I'm working through that. But if there's one place that codependency still shows up in my life and I catch it and I say it out loud, it's with him.
right. Sure. Well, yeah, and I mean, and it used to be with us as
Mhm.
well.
We healed away from that. We don't do that anymore.
No, now we have actually very good conversations about these kinds of stuff. And now I have a new partner after 5 years of healing. I actually have a partner, and when he and I disagree, I'm not afraid to talk about the disagreement. Whereas with my ex, what would happen is I wouldn't want him ever to get angry, because when he would get angry, it would take me back to that period of when I was a little child, and I couldn't handle anger. And that was all part of the way that I ran my business too. I never wanted a client to be angry or disappointed, or so again, overachieve, 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 overgive, overgive, overgive. And now it's kind of like, well, you know what? Like, hey, sweetie, I love you, but what you just said there hurt my feelings. That hurt my feelings because, you know, I feel like I am doing this, that, or the other. And then that gives him the opportunity to go, oh, um, okay, I think you're being a little sensitive here. I didn't mean it that way, or I did mean it that way, and I realize, ooh, you didn't take it as funny, you took it as this. It gives us an opportunity to open it up and talk about how we're both feeling.
Right. It's like, and that's how things come up, right? They come up and they touch our stuff.
Right,
Right. So that it's like, where does the healing have to happen? And that's, with the surrender release process, it's sort of just like things come up, they trigger you, they touch your stuff, and it happens in interpersonal relationship. And then how do we deal with it? It's like, well, an unhealed version of that would be flying off the handle and going and slamming the door.
right,
And then the healed version of it is having the conversation, being like, gosh, well, this brings up for me, it makes me feel like when I was 5 years old and hiding in the corner or whatever. That brings up for me a way that my ex-husband used to belittle me. And that's how that made me feel. So, one, it's bringing up that little pain point within you where the belittling took place in order to not write a story about it this time around, react to it different. So you're surrendering into that and just allowing it to process through, just allowing it to be. Gosh, this really hurts, feeling the hurt,
right,
and then just allowing it to move through. And you're not asking your current partner, you're not telling them that they're wrong and bad. You're just saying, hey, this hurt me for the following. It's just being really aware
right.
of what you're going through and aware of your feelings. And it's it's great. I mean, I can't imagine anymore living any other way than that.
That's true. I mean, I think again, it's the whole notion of loving the jungle.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
also having those friends and having the friends or the lovers or the people in your life that you can do this work with. Like when we're with our parents, who I think this is so funny, but they are very lucky. We are very close to them and we are I feel like our parents are genuinely lucky for the thing because I want to say that if you did not heal or you were not on a healing path,
Mhm.
that quite frankly there's a reality where it's just like I never want to see you again. Do you know what we've been through and that kind of thing? And the two of us are both willing to keep showing up, keep speaking our truth, and keep being in family and working in family on all of these things and not being afraid to shy away from speaking up like, well, and addressing it. And often they can't meet us where we are,
Right.
but we
Well,
say it anyway.
right. What did you say one time to me? You said, "So you're a butterfly trying to talk to a caterpillar, and you're speaking butterfly language, and they're speaking caterpillar language, and you can't really hear each other."
No, but we can hold them we can choose to hold them in a place of compassion. And we can also use our voices to be like, well, I disagree with you. We can also bring stuff up like, oh, are you starting that community group because you're looking for a need to be met for yourself? Or are
Right.
you start like, where are you starting that group from? Like there's sort of like different ways that we can just maybe bring some questions up if they ever choose to look at them. But we'll see.
Yeah.
They're in
Yeah.
their 80s.
They are. They are. And I mean, there's also something about being 80 and you're kind of set in your ways by that time. I mean, here's the thing, you're never old. You're never too old to change. You're never too old to begin the journey. You're never too old. But sometimes you can get stuck in the mud.
Yeah, I mean, and everybody does their work. Nobody gets away from doing their work.
Right.
We happen to be cognitively doing our work on Earth now. We are making a cognitive choice. Okay? You're gonna do your work some way. You're gonna do your work on the other side after you die. Nobody gets away from doing their work. No one gets away from looking at their actions and what they're up to.
Right. And I mean, this is a choice that we've made,
Yes.
right? It's not necessarily a choice that works for everybody.
No.
You know what
God,
I
no.
mean? This is
No.
a choice. We have made a conscious choice to do this. Now, there may be people who would hear this or look at this and think, well, that's a waste of time and money. You could just be doing this instead or this instead. And, you could just get a brand new car. You could just get a new house. You could just I mean, and that's fine because that's theirs.
Absolutely. Also, I would share that those people are not listening to this.
No, of course, but no, I shouldn't say of course. I shouldn't say of course. You never know. You never know who's going to tune in. But I think the thing about it for myself is that the question I ask is, does this bring me peace? Does this bring me a sense of fulfillment? Does this bring me a sense of completeness, moving forward, diving in? And with my personality being what it is, I'm always wanting to find the answers. I'm always wanting to ask the question. I'm always wanting to dig a little deeper because I'm a curious human being. And so, you know, this is how it works for me. It works for me to take the dive, to try to get to the bottom of the pool, to pick up the penny that somebody threw in. you know, and finding out that, I'm a little too buoyant, right? So I got to keep working on getting the air out of my lungs so I can get down, down, down into the deep parts. You know, it's for me, it's a daily, it's just a daily adventure,
Yeah.
which is what I want from my life. That, I mean, so, yes, I'm looking for peace, but I'm looking for the adventure,
Hmm.
daily adventure.
Yeah.
And that could be the people that I meet, that could be the situations I'm placed in. It could be me acknowledging that I need to take a nap.
Hmm.
I'm exhausted,
Being kind to yourself.
being kind, learning how to be kind, learning how to listen to myself, learning how to accept the gifts that I have,
Hmm.
actually coming back to realizing that there are gifts that need to be developed, and not to be afraid of.
Hmm.
There's all kinds of stuff that happens in a day. And what's wonderful is that at this point in my life, I'm very grateful that at the eve of 60, I am able to know that I'm looking forward to each day of my life, as
Yes.
opposed to, ugh, I have to get up this morning and I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to do this, and slogging through zombie-ish.
We
Uh,
always used to say, um, it'll be better when.
right. Or we just need to get through
Just let me get through.
just need to get through this event. We just need to get through this event. We just need to get through this.
But it
And
was always, there was never the end. It was always, we just need to get through. We just need to do. And now it's like, there's a joy in just the being.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's
Now there's a joy in, oh, well, this is exciting.
mhm. In the now.
Yeah.
It's not really looking towards the future or dwelling on the past. It's just sort of being more present moment
And it's
focused.
not Pollyanna-ish. I mean, that's the one thing. It isn't like, oh, everything is sunshine, lollipops, and roses, because it isn't.
No, it's a willingness to look at the shadow and be fully immersed in it, to learn to love it and integrate it with the light, and to have this just harmonious balance and willingness to just look at everything and to not judge it as good or bad, any of it.
Which is why I love the work that we are doing,
Hmm.
to bring it back to the work, right? What I love about the work that you are doing in the world, and I'm blessed enough to be part of this like kind of beginning stages of it, and so I get to be really a part of it, which is really exciting. But as each day is a new discovery for you into how to tap in with the people that you have um, working with you. How do you tap in? How do you help us to tap in? How do we dive deeper? How do we form community? How do we really take the hard look at what's there? And what's lovely is that you are helping us, all of us who are, blessed enough to be able to be working with you. You are really holding the space for us to discover for ourselves.
Yes.
And that's a beautiful thing, because it isn't like you're saying, hey, get your journal, and every single day I want you to write down 10 things you like about you. You know, you're not giving us, I mean, you're giving us tools, you're helping us find these tools, but what you're doing is kind of opening the door and allowing us to walk through and to find, it's almost like a video game, that game that dad loves so much. Our dad loves Tomb Raiders,
Uh-huh.
and he's always finding these little like coins or food packets or energy packets or whatever it is, and they're hidden, right?
Hmm.
But they become revealed when you step on a certain rock or you get
Right.
a certain, so you're like opening the door and letting us step through and discover what tools we need for ourselves. So my tool is different from, say, Margaret's tool or Carolina's tool or any of the people that are working with us, Cassidy's tools, anybody that you're working with, we all have different tools that we need.
Yes, my joy and what I love to do is help people get connected to their higher self, their I am presence, their God universe source. Like I never want anybody to be dependent on me. I want to help hold space and help you find your guidance for you. And
Right.
sometimes we can't hear ourselves because there's programming, trauma, and layers of distortion in front. So then, how can I work with you, get in your energy field, and help move those things out of the way and help you get connected to you? Because I don't have your answers. How are you learning your lessons and doing your work if I'm telling you? You find your path, you find your way. How can I help you with some tools to clear your jungle or whatever to see that next thing, right? And
Yeah.
I'm doing that
Yeah,
work
well,
for myself as
right.
well.
That's what I was just going to say. And you're also doing the work. So it's
Mhm.
like you're working, I'm working, and together we are, you know, we're getting to where we need to be for ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. It's a joy. I love this. I can't imagine doing anything else. It makes me so incredibly happy. And that's why I do it. because I've become one of the most selfish people I know. I just go ahead and do exactly, and I'm like, well, what does that bring me joy? And if the answer is no, then I'm not doing it.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I'm not there quite yet.
Life's too darn short. So I'm actually just looked at the clock here, and I think this might be a nice place for us to wrap up for the day. But we have not even begun to touch on anything. I think
We
it's
haven't
just a
touched on
lovely,
anything at all. I mean, I feel like we just had a like little,
yeah.
just a
I think
silly
we could
conversation.
chat 100 times. Just sort of end here with next time we talk to Sophie, which hopefully she will come back. That would make me so happy.
Okay.
Um, and we will definitely get her a microphone because I don't think so much ahead. Here, that's a perfect example of the trial and error. Next time we will have a microphone. But as we wrap up today, thank you so much, Sophie, for joining us. Thank you for being an amazing big sister and my constant, forever cheerleader, and just beautiful light in the world. And I love you.
I love you.
God, Universe Source loves you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.